I'll take one later. Yeah. You need to think about it. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. We are about to start. Hello also to the ones that are back home, and thank you, everybody. Please take a seat. We are about to start. Thank you all so much for coming today. I really appreciate that you all made it because I know that it's been a challenge to join us this afternoon. I know that we all have a struggle with the flights. I myself, I was supposed to be here yesterday and I just landed like an hour and a half ago. So thank you all for the effort and thank you to all of you that are also joining us online. So Heidi, are they all listening okay? Good? Okay, perfect. So again, welcome to our first in-person event at Women in Travel Thrive. And this is not only in person, it's a hybrid. So thank you again for joining us. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the agenda. We will start with some introductions. We will explain you what Women in Travel Thrive is, which I hope that you know, but if you don't, you will hear more from Sylvia later on. Then we will give some recognition to our volunteers because nothing would be possible without the volunteers' effort. And then we have some wonderful speakers lined up for you today. We have Melissa, we're gonna have here a fire chat, a one-on-one. Then, of course, we have our amazing keynote speaker, a bestseller author, Randy, as well, who flew in today and who also suffered the struggles of the flights. And last but not least, we are going to have a wonderful panel. Unfortunately, we have one member that could not make it. His flight has been canceled. Ankur Randev, Chief Commercial Officer at Highgate, won't be here with us today. Unfortunately, he was our male presence, but hopefully we will make it for him at another time. And then, of course, we will close the event and we have a wonderful networking time, all of us together, and time for drinks. I don't know if I am going to do coffee or wine because I'm kind of between things right now. I know that some of you also have international teams worldwide, and I wanted to tell you that we are an international nonprofit association. Everything that we do it from the bottom of our heart, and it's for free. And we have our wonderful colleagues in EMEA hosting another wonderful event, and I encourage you all to register. It's going to be online, but if you also have members in Europe, please tell them about the initiative so that we can also grow our EMEA chapter. Of course, same as our volunteers are a key element for our foundation, our sponsors are amazing and we couldn't be here without them because, like I said, everything that we do is free. All of our resources, everything that we provide to give back to the community is because of their efforts. So I wanted to thank, of course, Highgate, Hilton, Red Roof, Think, Ideas, Fontainebleau, Oracle, ETIP, Hertelier, and CRM. They are all supporting our events, and some of them have been supporting us since day one. And of course, thank you to HSMAI, because this event is happening in conjunction with HSMAI Foundation. They've been a huge supporter of HSMAI since the beginning. Sylvia's been working very closely with them, and they are just next door. Hopefully, we will have some HSMAI members joining us later today after the roundtables are done, and hopefully for the networker as well. And last but not least, of course, I want to introduce you to my wonderful friend, incredible person and professional, Sylvia Camarota. She's not only senior director at Expedia, she's the person behind this idea. She was the founder and president of Women in Travel Thrive. So Sylvia, thank you for making this happen.
Thank you. Well, hi, everyone. I am so excited to be here and our first sort of inaugural in-person event, but still a hybrid event so we can stream across the world, hopefully. I want to tell you a little bit about story about who we are, because, you know, as Mercedes alluded, in August of 2020, I was very angry. I was just really pissed. And I'm sure you all can guess why, right? None of us could meet in person. None of us could reach out. We felt like we were bubbled up in our silos. And what came out of it is just me trying to do something with some friends of mine at work and colleagues that I've always admired, like Mercedes, that I knew from the industry. We were together at South Florida chapter of HSMAI for many years prior to that. And I wanted to see, like, what can we do? How can we bridge across the boundaries of our silos or our companies? And who cares if we're competitors or at different roles, or we're CEOs or just starting up in a business? We have something in common. We didn't want the travel to die down, and we wanted to create connections and meaningful connections. So we started with a very simple idea. We would pair up the women and their allies where it makes sense as mentor-mentee-like relationships. And I think some of you in the room, I mean, if you want to raise your hand, if you were one of the first cohorts, we actually paired you up with some connections that, you know, hopefully to this day, you're able to have a meaningful impact relationship with. We haven't forgotten that that's been our original mission, but we have since, and I'm going to take the clicker here. Again, this goes back to the original mission, but we have since also pivoted to making sure that we can do something tangible. And that is, we are giving away actual tangible resources to the women that are most in need to be supported. Regardless of the pandemic that may be in the past, and we've seen the resurrection, whatever it is, the angry travel period that has happened, the come and go of our travel industry and some of our colleagues. But, right now, the time hasn't changed from the fact that women are still struggling to getting into certain levels of the industry, and it gets tougher on the top, but it's also getting sometimes tough to get in, particularly if you don't know where to start. And the empowerment resources, like I said, were asked by our members. We polled them last year, and we said, what are some of the ways that we could help you? What are some of the tangible ways? And what we've done is it's a very simple application. Actually, anybody that that may benefit from it can go on our site and apply for these resources. And they could choose up to 3 of these elements that we will support and actually pay for and make sure that they receive these type of resources. So this board, these are not stock images. These are actual women. Maybe you recognize some of them, and they're awesome women that are in travel, and they all had a different need. Some of them didn't have a job through pandemic, or they lost their job and didn't know how to get back into it. Some of them were looking to grow their career and just taking that next step and could really benefit from a resume rewrite or interview coaching session. And that's what Women in Travel Thrive has been able to provide them. And we're doubling down because of very, very gracious sponsors that we have. We are able to give more of these, and we want to double down our effort on giving and just continue to give these out. So please, please spread the word. If you know of a woman in a travel, or if you yourself are looking for a little bit of that kick in a butt to get to that next level, you let us know. You apply, and we'll make sure that you receive some of these resources as well. There are no membership fees in our organizations. You can just follow us. We're about to reach 5,000 followers on LinkedIn, which is very cool. Thank you. And you can just be part of our community. So how can you get involved? You can actually help to power this. This is a grassroots organization. There are no titles. There are no, there's no CEOs. And we have some kind of loosely based board of directors or leads for our what we're calling Thrive Hives. But if you're just passionate about helping or giving back, because at some point every one of us should in our careers, just join us and see how you can help. Maybe you have an idea. Maybe you want to just give back to somebody. Maybe you want to help us with events or putting together some great programming so we can continue to create awareness. But there's many ways to do that. And if not, because we understand there's sometimes bandwidth limitations, maybe there's something else going in your lives. Maybe you have other passion projects, and that's okay too. You can still be our advocate. So please share, please follow us, please listen in. And lastly, if you're part of an organization that wants to be involved and you can help to support those empowerment resources, we are 501c3 charity. You can give it back, and we can help to make some impact together. But like I said, none of this would happen if it wasn't for the volunteer list. We have increasingly growing volunteer lists. I think the highlighted folks that were specifically impactful for this event today, but there's many names here, many companies here, right? That are just all across the travel, and they're all there willing to help. And they're like me, right? They're one of those people that are just have the passion, they want to make impact, and they just don't give up, frankly. I want to thank the advisory board, Melissa Mayer, Laura Kalin, Noreen Henry, and Rachel Humphrey, who've been guiding us and supporting us in many ways with their ideas and with their direction. And also our managing director, Andrea, who's just behind the scenes helping us and running our Zoom right now. There's few people that deserve maybe just a little extra special recognition. And this one lady, Patricia Philadelphia, she's a senior leisure sales manager from Seminole Hard Rock. Massive talent, by the way, if anybody's looking. Not that I know if she's looking, but she's just a wonderful, wonderful human, and somebody that I've known for many years. She joined us from the beginning and was a huge part of the events with Mercedes and helping these type of events come to life. She never said no. She said, let's do it. We'll figure it out. Well, you know, without resources and with limited bandwidth, with another job, she was able to come here and, you know, bring some of these things to life that we've had in the past 3 years. And last but not least, I'll recognize one more person with a very special recognition, very close to my heart, friend, a colleague, somebody that I'm going to cry probably, somebody that learned a whole nother skill, which is running social media, and that's not her day job. Heidi Bodalia, area manager, Expedia Group. We work together on 2 things at Expedia Group and also Women in Travel Thrive. Heidi, thank you so much for being there. You know, if you see some of our social posts, they're amazing. They are all put together with people that just like to be creative and just fulfill themselves. And you've put together this group of volunteers and you continue to amaze me every single day. So thank you. Well, with that, I am going to get us to the main stage. So Mercedes, back over to you. Thank you everyone for being here. And I can't wait to talk to you at the Networker.
Thank you, Sylvia. I don't think that any of us knew how strong and how big we were going to become when we first started Thrive, that back in August 2020, wasn't it? I remember when you called me, I was in Spain and I was like, Sylvia, I don't know what is it that you intend to do, but count me in. If this is about supporting women in the industry, definitely yes. So like Sylvia said, volunteer, join us. We have an incredible community. We have a Slack group chat that it's very active. I have it every day in my computer. So I encourage all of you to join us if you are not a member already. But without further ado, Randy, I want to really say thank you, because she is an incredible, talented writer and also speaker. And when Emily introduced us, you said yes. You didn't hesitate. She committed her time, her fee, her life, her everything to be here with us today. And she's stuck with us because her flight was canceled. So we are going to enjoy her for the rest of the evening. So please stay till the Networker because you will be able to talk to her a little bit more. So Randy, please welcome me, joining me in the stage, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Mercedes. Thank you to Emily Canders at Hertelier, who connected me and nominated me for this. And thank you to all of the clients who support my business, who allow me the opportunity to give pro bono opportunities back to organizations that are truly worthy. It is such a pleasure to be here with you today. And we're gonna do this one more time. Ready? Go, go, gadget slide. Some of you will know that cultural reference. There we go. Yay. I've said since we pivoted to virtual, like, is it a day that ends in Y if there's not a tech issue? I don't think so. So I am delighted to be here with you all today. I'm so delighted that I made it and Mercedes made it. So I was so worried that I wasn't going to have a chance to ask you this extremely important question, which is, how many of you have ever been personally victimized by Regina George? Yes, right? Has anyone in here not seen Mean Girls? Okay. Sometimes there's a moment where we need to break at the beginning and fill someone in the room who hasn't seen Mean Girls. I happen to think this is one of the most culturally relevant questions that has been asked in the last 20 years. And I live in Washington, D.C., so I feel like that's really saying something. Now I want to ask you another question, which is, raise your hand if you've ever been personally victimized by yourself. Because if you have ever told yourself a version of this story, you know, I'm so hard on myself, but I swear it's what makes me so successful, then you have been victimized rather by your inner critic. Don't feel bad. It is incredibly universal, especially, and I can't underscore this point enough, especially for high-performing women. How do I know? Because this is what I have literally devoted my life to. As Mercedes mentioned, my name is Randy Braun. I'm an executive coach, and I'm the CEO of the women's leadership firm, Something Major. I'm also very proud to tell you that my book, Something Major, the new playbook for women at work, which came out in March, is one of the few business books by women 4 women to ever crack the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. Proof in the pudding that what you're doing here in this room with each other matters. When women empower women, we all win. So when we talk about quieting our inner critic today, I'm not here to talk to you about hollow platitudes or lofty ideas. I want to talk to you about the real tools I use with my real coaching clients to help them really quiet their inner critics. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what the inner critic is. I'm sure as we're sitting here in this room together, this contextually makes sense to you. We're going to spend a little bit of time making sure that we're holding hands around the same definition. Then we're going to talk about what makes your inner critic. Because even though having an inner critic is an absolutely positively universal experience, how we experience our inner critic, how Mercedes experiences it versus Heidi versus Sylvia versus myself looks different for everybody. We're going to talk about how to disentangle the inner critic from the voice of reason, because boy, does the inner critic love to tell you that they are the voice of reason. They're not. And then we're going to talk about a few different strategies for quieting our inner critic. As we have this conversation together, I'm going to make one ask of you, and it's this. I do not want you to treat our time together like a prescription. Rather, I want you to treat it more like a buffet. Every single woman in this room and ally has a different set of goals, a different set of priorities, a different lived experience, and a different origin story. There's a reason we're going to look at 5 telltale signs for knowing it's your inner critic. There's a reason we're going to talk about 5 ways to quiet your inner critic, because I will know I've done my job, not if I just wrote you a prescription for self-confidence. That wouldn't really work, but rather I'll know I've done my job if every single one of you walks away with 1 to 2 things that move the dial for you. Any questions for me? Well, I have a question for you. We can get handheld mics passed if we're going to hear from people, or you can shout it and I can repeat it for the people who are on the WebEx. When I say the words inner critic, what do you think I mean? What do I mean by inner critic? Heidi?
The voice inside your head.
The voice inside your head. What kind of voice, Heidi?
Negative.
Negative. So Heidi says the negative voice inside your head. Who else? What's your name? Hi, Sharonda.
Also your competitive voice inside.
Ooh, competitive voice. Wait, Mercedes, keep her with the microphone for a second. What does that mean?
So it just means, I have to do better. I have to be better.
Yeah,
It's that competitive.
that voice of should.
Yeah.
One of my clients said to me a few months ago, she's like, I have got to stop shoulding all over myself. Anyone else? Oh, is it Tracy?
Yes.
Yes. With an I, right?
Let me run, because this way the Zoomers will.
Yes.
I had an executive coach that called my inner voice a gremlin
Uh-huh.
because I would feed it,
Yeah.
and then I would feed it after midnight and it would get worse. Like, you think it's cute and cuddly and helpful, and then you do something and it turns evil. So a gremlin is what he referred to it as.
Yes. And if you've ever read The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown, she goes deep. My favorite thing about it, she goes like deep into the science of perfectionism, and then she talks gremlins. It's a great summer read after you finish my book, of course, right? So I think of as the inner critic as the voice of self-doubt, the voice of judgment. And while our inner critics can be mean and gremlin-like and competitive, they're not really good or bad. They're not inherently evil. They're inherently human, because all the inner critic really is an internal warning sign. And all our inner critic cares about is keeping us safe from what I think of as the Long Island iced tea of fear. So it's that fear of rejection, humiliation, failure, all of those things. Listen, I know we're going to have a networking break later. I don't really know how you feel about Long Island iced teas. For me, they're not really my jam. They're not my personal taste. But For you, I celebrate you if you want to sip on a Long Island iced tea. When it comes to the Long Island iced tea of fear, that inner critic inside of us, here's my rule. You can sip on that Long Island iced tea of fear, but you don't want to get drunk on it. Because what happens is when high-performing women start to make decisions day in and day out, year in and year out, where our inner critic is at the wheel, is that we start to move through our careers from a place of minimizing failure instead of maximizing success. And those are different things. Because to be clear, your inner critic does not care about your hopes, your dreams, your goals. And every single woman who is sitting in this room knows that just to have been in this room, to be in the jobs you're in today, to have stretched yourselves outside of your work lives, oftentimes we need to take risks, we need to take chances, and we need to be able to stand up for what we believe in and what we know our worth is. That's what makes this conversation so table stakes. So we've talked a little bit about what the inner critic is. And now I want to talk about how you can identify your inner critic. So think about for a second what it sounds like when you're being hard on yourself. I know that when I'm being hard on myself, it sounds like that was stupid. They're going to know you're an idiot. I'm not being self-deprecating. This is honestly what it sounds like in a moment when my inner critic is going on and on and on inside my head. So take a moment and think about what it's like when you're hard on yourself. And now I want you to tell me, that voice of self-doubt, that inner critic inside your head, what are some telltale signs that what you're hearing when you hear that talk track might be your inner critic? What are some telltale signs that you think when you're hearing that negative self-doubt in your head that it might be your inner critic? Yeah, what's your name? Hi, Jess. I'm going to repeat for the people on the Zoom and in the room. Yeah.
Ruminating and repeating.
Ruminating and repeating. Who can relate to that? Yes, we're going to get there in a second. Anyone else?
Yeah, people online too.
Yeah, anyone online want to share?
Not yet. Please don't be shy.
All right, so here's what I think of as these 5 signs. And to be clear, there's more than 5. Here are just some popular ones. The first is that it's mean or judgy. Yes, judgy is the official coaching terminology. And over the networking reception, I will tell you the battle I had to wage with my publisher to get that word in print, okay? So my rule of thumb is that if it's something you wouldn't say to a friend, to a colleague, to a sister, to a mentor, to a mentee, but you're willing to say it to yourself, probably the inner critic, right? The second, and Jess hit this one, it plays on repeat. So our inner critics, they're not particularly creative, but they are exceedingly consistent. So for a lot of us, we identify with these same zingers that we hear again and again and again. Now, for some of us, maybe you're like me and Jess, where you're hearing it on repeat and it's loud, it's deafening. Some of us experiencing it in that deafening way. And then some of us experience it as what I call the personal news ticker. You know how when you're watching the news at night, whoever you're watching, it's like you've got the host and the guest and that little block telling you what you're watching, but you have that ticker underneath. Some of us experience the inner critic as that soft voice, just on low throughout our day. So one of my clients explained it to me as, I'm in meetings, but what is happening inside my brain is my inner critic is just silently whispering, they're going to know you don't deserve to be here. They're going to know you don't deserve to be here. They're going to know you don't deserve to be here. So some of us experience it as that personal news ticker. 2 more I want to share with you. One is that for a lot of women, the inner critic parrots people we know. And this can play out in 2 ways. For some of us, it parrots messages we heard maybe from a parent growing up or some other authority figure, a pastor, a teacher, someone who might have had your best interest at heart, someone who might not have had your best interest at heart. For years, my inner critic sounded like this horribly toxic boss that I had. You'll read about her in chapter 2 in my book. For others, and you know what I've seen over the years in my coaching practice is that while I can only speak to my lived experience, for years coaching women of color and women of other diverse lived experiences, for them, their inner critics have often parroted messages that they've heard about who they need to be in a world that wasn't built for their success. So when we talk about parroting people, we know it's parroting people, messages, and on that kind of macro scale, parroting those kinds of trends. And then finally, the critic gets loud around important things, which makes a lot of sense because it's an internal warning system. And one of the things that I was talking about with Melissa before we started was not only does the critic sometimes get loud around important things when we're nervous, like, is the meeting going to go okay? Am I going to get that job? Am I going to get the promotion? But our inner critics get really chatty when the stakes are high because things are good. Last week, I felt like the honor of a lifetime. I got to go to Times Square and see like my book and my name in lights, right? In one of those big billboards in Times Square. And what stunned me was how loud my inner critic was because something was important to me, but it was good. I was like, oh, what if there's a mistake? What if like it was a mix-up and it's not supposed to be me, right? And so it's important to know that when the stakes are high, whether it's good stuff or bad stuff, our inner critic can get really chatty. So I'd love to pause for a minute and hear how this list is landing with you. Which of these do you recognize?
So Alyssa online just said all of them.
All of them. I do get that sometimes. Thanks. Alyssa online would love to hear where you're from.
Where she's from.
Okay.
She's from Orlando.
Hi, in Orlando. Amazing. Tell me your name.
Libby.
Hi, Libby.
Number one,
Okay.
it is mean. It uses curse words.
Okay.
And number five, because anytime, not necessarily in a work situation, but if something goes well in non-work, it's like, why is something good happening to you?
Who else can relate to that? Yeah. Anyone else want to share? How does your inner critic show up?
I wanted to say number one as well. I'm Angie, by the way.
Hi, Angie.
Hi. I wanted to say mean or judgy as well, because I think most of the time, if we express what that inner critic is saying to colleagues, they would say, it's not true. You're not like that. That's not true. You're better than that. I see it every day. They disagree with that inner critic.
Yeah, and we lost the mic for a second, so I'm just going to repeat, like if colleagues hear what I'm thinking, they disagree. And it's funny that you say that because I was just in a coaching session last week with one of my clients, and she was feeling wrecked by something that her inner critic was wreaking havoc on. And she said the words out loud after stewing on it for like 4 days. And she was like, wow, now that I just said that out loud, that is actually preposterous, right? So there is something about the way it gets whipped up in our head, that is so hyperbolic and often has no grounding in reality. Heidi?
Andy, I was going to say my mean me comes with punishment.
Ooh, my mean me comes with punishment. Like what?
Muffins, banana cakes, chocolate.
See, proof in the pudding that we got to treat this as a prescription, not a buffet, because everything Mercedes just listed is solidly under my self-care category. Yeah, baked goods for me lives in self-care, not punishment.
It
Heidi-
depends on the amount.
Yeah, Heidi, what were you going to say?
And we have Rita from Mississauga in Canada, and she said that we fail to credit our own gender. What do you think?
We what?
We fail to credit our own gender. Like women don't support women, I think.
Yeah.
She wants to know what you think about that.
Yeah, I think it cuts both ways. So one of the things that I find to be interesting is there is something out there called toxic femininity. This idea that essentially women feel competitive with other women in the workplace. We operate on this false mentality that there's only room for so many of us at the table. And so when you have the toxic femininity mindset, you push other women down. Who here has felt sidelined in the workplace by a woman who didn't have your best interest at heart? Yeah. Who here has also had mentoring from a woman in the industry that has helped shape their career? Right. I'm a huge believer, as I imagine all of you are who are here today, that we go further when we support each other. It's an idea called shine theory that belongs to Aminatou Sow and Anne Friedman, which is essentially when women collaborate instead of compete with each other, we advance. And so I hope we can all practice shine theory. One thing I'm very optimistic about is that I do believe that we do champion other women in a way we often don't champion ourselves. Unfortunately, finding that championing from other women is not enough to quiet our inner critics, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. Any other thoughts or feedback? Heidi, with more from the chat?
Yeah, there's one more from the chat. Anastasia said, just bear with me 1 second.
Take your time.
I can't do two things at once. She feels that number one as well. She's very mean and calls herself names. It makes me sad.
Yeah, it is sad. And yet it's so universal. And I want you to just take a moment, now that you know these 5 telltale things, these 5 telltale signs, and just think to yourself, like, what are the harsh and mean things that your inner critic says? Like for me, I mentioned at the top, like, people are going to know you're an idiot. What does your inner critic believe about the world and believe about you? My inner critic believes that anything less than success is failure. What's the temperament of your inner critic when you start to kind of think about these things? Is your inner critic anxious, fearful? Mine's like very anxious and fearful. Like I have to have like a somatic reaction when I talk about it, right? Because it's like, she's just sitting there like freaking out and trembling all the time. Some women who I talk to, their inner critics are extremely overconfident, right? So just think for a moment, you know, who is your inner critic? Because knowing who she is your first step in learning how to quiet her. Every single time we have a moment of awareness, we have a moment of choice. One other question I want to ask you is, as we're going through this exercise, who in the room or in the chat is like, no, you don't understand, this really is my voice of reason? Because this is something I get a lot. It's like, I've heard you, it's mean, I get it, it's judgy, I get it, it's parroting, you know, my 4th grade teacher, you know, I see this, but I still don't believe that this is an inner critic or it's bad. I really think it's my voice of reason. Anybody going through that right now? Yes. Can we give her them? And she doesn't want the mic. You don't have to take it. You don't have to take it. Buffet, not prescription. Didn't need to put you on the spot. What I will say is that if one person in the room feels it, often other people in the room feel it as well. And it's an important distinction to make. I want to make sure that we're breaking down what is the difference between the inner critic and the voice of reason. What do you think the difference is? Yeah? Yeah. Wait. Did you say Rosalind? Yeah. Nice.
Hi, I think that I would say the difference would be, I think of the voice of reason as being neutral and like you can back up the like whatever it's saying with like actual facts and like objective things, whereas the inner critic is like more, it's like you can't really back it up and it's more emotional, and yeah, that's what I would say.
Absolutely. So what I heard was that the inner critic is more emotional and illogical. And the voice of reason, you can back up what it's saying with facts. It's more reasoned. Absolutely. Anyone else? What do you think the difference is between the inner critic, that voice of self-doubt, that Long Island iced tea of fear, and the voice of reason, which is our place of true inner confidence and wisdom? Because they can get very mixed up if we're not careful. Okay.
So there's a couple of things in the chat. Shilpa said that the voice of reason, we spend too much time on what others think of us. And then Emily has shared that the voice of reason has more compassion for your circumstances.
I love all of these answers. Anything else from the chat,
Yeah.
Heidi?
And Alexandra in Miami said, it's what I would tell a friend if they came to me with those thoughts.
Absolutely. And it's so funny how we're, again, there's a theme, right? We're so much, it's so much easier to champion other women than it is to champion ourselves. There's something broken about that. It's not that we're broken. It's that so many of us listen to this voice of self-doubt without checking it, that we forget that we need to provide that to ourselves as well. So let's break it down really quickly. Inner critic voice versus the voice of reason. There's probably 40 things I could have put on each side, but here are a few that I, like to point out. The inner critic tends to make declarations, present ultimatums, and obsess over the problems, right? You're either a success or a failure. You're either going to kill it on the panel or you're going to be a complete flop. You're either going to get the promotion or you're going to get fired. Your career is going nowhere, right? The inner critic, again, it plays on repeat, mean, harsh, and judgy, loud when the stakes are high. It's just this doom loop, if you will, of that Long Island iced tea of fear. The voice of reason, on the other hand, does things like, and Rosalind hit on a lot of these, asks curious questions, assesses the options, seeks solutions. So instead of saying the presentation is either going to be a success or a failure, right? Instead of declaring it, oh my God, it's going to be a failure, the voice of reason, it takes a deep breath, looks through the deck and is like, where might the weak points be? Who might need to review these slides? Who's someone I can pressure test this off of, right? Or seeks the solutions. Who do I need to ask for help from here? And the most important thing to remember, because the inner critic is, again, that internal warning sign that you might be getting near fear, right? I just want to remind you, it is an incredible problem identifier, but a horrible problem solver, because nobody in this room ever solved a problem by making declarations, presenting ultimatums, and obsessing over the problems. Could you imagine going to one of your stakeholders at work when you leave Toronto and go home and being like, we have a problem, it's going to be an absolute failure, there's nothing we can do about it, we're all getting fired? How do you think that would go over? I mean, I know we run bad meetings in the workplace, but I think that's a bridge too far for everybody, okay? Right? It's the voice of reason that is a great problem solver, because as you know, whether you are solving the problem by yourself or you are leading a collaborative effort, we solve problems when we have space to get curious about questions, about options, and about solutions. So that is how I think about the inner critic versus the voice of reason. Again, inner critic, amazing problem identifier. We don't want to get drunk on that Long Island iced tea of fear. Horrible problem solver. That's what the voice of reason is for. Any questions or thoughts about this? Heidi?
We have another one from the chat. Rita asks, does culture and traditions play a role into the inner critic mentality?
100%. 100%. So Rita and anyone else who shares that question, as you might recall a few slides ago, we talked about the 5 telltale signs of the inner critic. Parents, people we know. I see that this plays out for women who have all sorts of different lived experiences, whether they are women of color, whether they are coming from immigrant families, right? Because what happens is the inner critic tends to weaponize anything negative that a lot of us have heard. And so if you have expectations coming from, let's say, I think the question was a different culture, messages you've heard, you know, and you're living a life outside of those messages, what I've experienced, again, just from coaching women who are living some of those experiences, is that, you know, I think of one woman, I write about her in the book. She had an incredibly successful financial services career, but she didn't do the right things of marrying the right boy at the right time, from the right family or the right ethnicity. And she was single, but pursuing her career. And even though she loved what she was doing, the messages that she heard from mom and dad and the aunties about what she was doing or not doing with her life, that was something that her inner critic would heap a lot of judgment on. So I hope, Rita, that answers your question. I'm not sure if people in the room have any follow-up questions to that or to anything else. Yeah. Yeah. Or for those online, we're waiting for a mic.
Helping me with my steps.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Katie.
Hi, Katie.
My question for you was going back to the inner critic. I wanted to get your thoughts on imposter syndrome.
Yes.
And if you have any advice for overcoming that. When I first started, I was right out of college in my first job, and I was one of the youngest people at our office. And so for a long time, that was something that I struggled with. Thanks.
Absolutely. Any guesses about why I personally despise the term imposter syndrome? It's not personal to you.
Because it's real. It's not an imposter.
Ooh, that wasn't what I was going to say. But I love now why I know why Heidi hates the term imposter syndrome. Any other guesses?
Perpetuates it.
Say more. Sylvia just said it perpetuates it.
It's another inner critic. It's essentially, the more you start talking about, you actually think about believing it. It's like, oh, I'm an imposter, I'm an imposter,
Yeah.
imposter. And we just keep talking about it. Why are we talking about it?
more about women thinking themselves as being imposters.
What's your name?
Alina.
Anina?
Alina.
Alina. Okay, thank you. So what Alina said was that it's mostly associated with women, not with men. So everyone's kind of talking around it. I hate the terminology of imposter syndrome because there's a lot of research that has come out over the last few years that really talks about why when we use the terminology imposter syndrome, it's very damaging. So when we use the terminology imposter syndrome to describe the insecurity, self-doubt, self-judgment that we have navigating the workplace, here's the thing about imposter syndrome. Taylor Swift was wrong. It's not you. You're not the problem. It's not you. Because what it really is it's the fact that we are going to workplaces that weren't designed for our success. So what scholars have said about the fact that when we use the word imposter syndrome, we're actually letting the systemic issues off the hook, right? It is the internalization of misogyny, of racism, of every other kind of force that we have. Again, every single woman in this room has a different lived experience that we experience navigating the workplace in a system that was not designed for our success. And so when we talk about imposter syndrome, we let those systems, those inequities off the hook. That's why when we talk about the inner critic, what I want to be able to acknowledge is that we all do have self-doubt. It's not your fault. We go to work every day in a system that was not built for our success. The inner critic is not a tool for overcoming those broad systemic iniquities. It is a tool for shifting microculture so that we can feel a little bit more like we can thrive on a daily basis while we wait for those macro forces and do our part to change them so that we go to work every day in a more even playing field. So Katie, my biggest recommendation to you, what you were probably experiencing was not, I don't want to speak for you, your imposter syndrome. It sounds like what you were experiencing were the dynamics of being the youngest person on the team, maybe the only woman, right? And it's interesting, research shows that a man will apply for a job if he has something like 40% of the qualifications on the posting. A woman, I see people nodding, right? I've seen a few different versions of this study, 90 to 100% of the qualifications to apply, right? So there's a lot of internalization of the kind of systemic iniquities, and that's not a your company thing. That's not a hospitality industry thing. That's a living in 2023 thing. And I'm really bullish about where we're going and even about gatherings like this to have real conversations that really move the dial. Any other questions? Should we talk about a few ways to quiet our inner critic? What do we think? Okay, phenomenal. So we're going to talk about 5 ways to quiet our inner critic. But the first thing is I want to talk about the #1 fail that I see women have when it comes to quieting our inner critic. So what do you think is the #1 thing that brilliant, successful, high-performing women do every single day to try and quiet our inner critic that actually makes it louder? Not ignore it, but that is definitely in my top 3. It's seek external validation, right? How many of you have ever sought external validation from somebody else because you didn't feel good, right? And here's the thing is, I love this quote from Amy Bateman. If you live by other people's compliments, you will die from their criticism. Because eventually you will hear something that you did not like, and that will just spoon feed new material to your inner critic. Instead, I want to encourage you to do these 5 things. #1, I want you to practice following your fear to the end game. A lot of times when we actually pause and follow the fear to the end game, we realize how hyperbolic and unlikely the inner critic's worst case scenario is. And I see some nodding heads. The second, I want you to practice greeting the inner critic with humor. Like, what is hilarious about what the inner critic has to say? Like that example I gave you about the Times Square billboard. Like, how weird would that be if if they sent me 1 million emails about it and confirmed a date and a time and a place, but it was like something I imagined or it wasn't really going to happen? Like, that's actually ludicrous. That doesn't make any sense. So I want you to practice greeting the inner critic with humor. Third, and I think this is so important for the women in this room, which is give back to others with your knowledge. So research in the field of psychology shows that in moments where you're having a crisis of confidence, taking the time to mentor, to help someone else, to give advice actually boosts your confidence and can be one of the most important tools for quieting your inner critic, because like Rosalind said before, right, our inner critics, the antidote to them is data. It's proof. And giving back to others is one way that we prove that we've got it. Number 4 is envisioning the alternatives. So when your inner critic is laser focused on something that it just won't let go of, take a pen and paper and actually write out what are 2 or 3 other ways that the scenario could go. Research shows that doing this by hand also really helps. And importantly, again, from that facts perspective, you're actually putting out different scenarios that remind the inner critic that there might be other truths, there might be other solutions, there might be other ways. And then finally, I love this idea of channeling our inner Babe Ruth. So one of the things that you might know is that Babe Ruth held the record for home runs, but at the same time, he concurrently held the records for strikeouts. And when I talk about channeling our inner Babe Ruth, I want us to think about this as a model for moving beyond minimizing failure instead of maximizing success. Remembering that to hit a home run, we have to strike out along the way. So with that, to wrap it up, today we talked about what the inner critic is, how to recognize your inner critic, a few ways to sort out the inner critic from the voice of reason, and strategies for quieting our inner critic. There's so much more about this in my book. And the final thought that I just want to offer you is, I know it takes work, but I do want you to think about, as you get to know your inner critic and practice these tools, starting to come from a place of love for your inner critic. Because again, it's not there to hurt you. It really is there to keep us safe, even if it's a little misguided, mean, and hyperbolic along the way. When we can learn to quiet it, we can kind of take it for what it is as a data point so that we can follow the trend line. I hope that you'll keep in touch with me, and I mean it. You can find me on somethingmajorcoaching.com. You can find me on LinkedIn as Randy Braun, or Instagram on Something Major Coaching. I know that we took questions during. I want to keep to our very tight agenda, especially since we spent a few minutes at the beginning getting settled in. I look forward to answering more questions in the networking later tonight. Thank you.
I think that I lost the clicker.
I have it.
Okay. Thank you, Randy. I think that, well, you empowered us all and you uplifted the room with a laugh, with sharing a little bit of experiences between all of us. So thank you so much. I'm going to use that later. Okay, so before continuing, and we need to go back to the original presentation, please. I wanted to say, and I don't know if you've noticed, that we have a new logo. Ooh. So since we started, we've been evolving as an association. We, like I said, we didn't know where we were gonna land today, but we knew that we wanted to help. And our volunteers have been helping all the way. And we've been evolving with our goals, although our mission has always been the same, and our logo has evolved as well. So just last month, we were voting, and we have a new palette of colors and a new brand identity, and we are going to have some new items for purchase, and everything that you get through the Thrive store, again, goes to all of the resources to give back to the community. So if you notice, some of us are wearing some t-shirts, and you can get other materials as well. So thank you for the hard work that the marketing team has done at the Thrive Hive. And I hope that you like this new line. And now we are going to greet our next guest speaker, if I can make the clicker work. No? Some help, maybe? I need to change slides. Okay. There you go. Perfect. So please welcome Melissa. Melissa, how do you pronounce your last name? Okay. Yorkois? Yorkois. So Melissa Yorkois, please join me.
That is a problem everybody has. Don't worry.
Well, I can always blame it to my Spanish heritage and origin, so please excuse my accent. I will forever have one. So Melissa, thank you so much for supporting our association. You were another one that also through Emily, that's how we connected. And same with Randy, when we reached out to you, you supported us as a sponsor with your time, with your efforts. So thank you for joining us here today.
Of course.
So here's what is going to happen. This is going to be kind of an interview format, a one-on-one. It's called Far Chat. I'm going to just ask Melissa some questions, but this will be more like a conversation, and then we'll move into the panel. But before doing so, I'm going to ask all of the panelists to introduce themselves with obviously name, role, but one very important thing. Why are you here today, and why supporting Women in Travel Thrive?
It's a really great question. So Melissa Jerkois, I always tell people it's turquoise with a J. So you're welcome. Chief Experience Officer at Thank Hospitality Tech Startup. I am here because I have always been an advocate for women, especially women in underrepresented leadership, tech, hospitality, and I have been one. So for me, it's super important. I also co-founded an initiative called Diversify Thinking to encourage diversity of thought, really focused around women and creating spaces for them. So it's a huge passion of mine, actually.
Well, I'm glad that we share that. Obviously, one thing that I love about having you here today is that your background is technological. And you started a career in a field that was totally male dominated, especially if we think, if we think that we are where we are today, think backwards and 80s, 90s. So Melissa went into engineering back in the 90s. So why?
I ask myself that sometimes still. So it's a really good question. That wasn't my original path, actually. So when I was young, like a lot of little girls, I thought I was going to be a teacher. And I used to teach my stuffed animals. I was really an exceptional teacher at that age. Then I went, through school, and because of the time frame, I really didn't have a lot of exposure to tech. Not in my home and really not in school. We actually learned to type on typewriters, believe it or not. So really didn't have a lot of exposure to it. Always had a love for English and writing. So thought I was going to be an English teacher or journalist. And actually, right up until my senior year, applied to several schools, mostly liberal arts schools, for English, like English journalism, creative writing. That was my love. It came really easy to me. I really enjoyed it. So didn't have a lot of exposure. My last year of high school, I actually took a programming class because I had to fill an elective. I just needed the credits. Really wasn't like a passion of mine. I had no thoughts behind it. I was the only girl in this very small computer room, big CRT monitors, if you can imagine. Only girl in there. There was 4 other boys in the class, and I just aced it. And the teacher said to me, "Have you done this before?" And we were programming in BASIC. I wrote an awesome program where I made a little boy let go of balloons and they went up to the top of the screen. And I thought I was like God. It was like, I was magical. And I was like, no. And she said, "Have you considered this?" I'm like, no. And all of a sudden it opened my eyes to something. And I thought, wow, there's this path I can take, which I was already on, that felt like home to me, really comfortable. I loved it. I was passionate about writing. It was what I always thought I was going to do. I could teach. And then there was this new thing that just sort of crept up behind me, and it caught me by surprise. And I was like, wow, this is going to be really hard. I'm looking around, there's just boys doing it. I have no clue what I'm doing. Oh, by the way, I never took physics or chemistry in high school. I didn't have all the right setup to do it. And all of a sudden I was like, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. So for me, it represented, I realize now, obviously not then, but now looking back, it was growth. I was going to grow and I was going to be able to become a different version of me. Whereas if I went the other path, it was comfortable, easy, but almost too easy. So I didn't feel challenging at all. So, and there it goes. And that's what I ended up doing.
I wonder, I know at least of one person in the audience that had a wonderful technological background and she succeeded to the sky. But do we have any tech people or anyone that started in a field that was mainly male dominated? Well, I see 3 hands. Well, that's something. Actually four. Well, that's normal because especially within HSMAI, we have a lot of people in sales and marketing, and that field is mainly dominated by female. I mean, we have to recognize that, but I think that it takes an extra courage to get into somewhere where you know that you are going to be a minority. And that leads me to my next question. What kind of support system did you have back then? Did you have a lot of support from your family? Did you have, by chance, any mentor, any role model, or any female leader that helped you through all of that decision process?
Yeah, so I mean, in my collegiate career, not a whole lot of support. In fact, I've actually worked with the college I went to create support for women trying to change their pathways in college, because it was way too hard for me, like way too hard. And so not so much there, but I did have like one professor actually during that I'll never forget him. He's now long since retired, but he was the only person that kept telling me, keep going. I actually had professors that said to me, yeah, maybe you're just not cut out for this, because that was that inner critic that I was also hearing myself. So I was, parroting people I was hearing around me. And then as I went into my career, I actually had a couple early on in my engineering career, I had a couple of female bosses and leaders. The director of engineering actually at the time was a female. And that was really inspiring to me, because I was like, okay, that's a picture of something that could happen for me. Whereas like through college, I did not have that at all. I was surrounded by male professors, male students, and really didn't have a support system. So, and I think that made a big difference. I think it made it a lot harder for me. So having more support during that process would have been a lot better. But then like, again, getting into the professional side of the house, there was some, not much, but some early in my career. So I'm very thankful for that.
Well, perhaps the audience is not that familiar with your career, but something that I like about everything that you've been doing in your career is that you started, and correct me if I'm wrong, with Amadeus, and you worked for them for more than 20 years. Then you transition from a more technological role into more like a product kind of role, more like a managing.
Yeah, during the time at Newmarket, then Amadeus, like from engineering into product management. Yes.
But the beauty of it is that obviously you have that experience in one of the largest travel tech companies in the world. And now you work for a startup. You've been helping that startup being successful here in America. So I wonder, have you noticed any differences or similarities between a big firm or a small firm when it comes to being a woman in travel and hospitality, or a woman in tech? And any differences between large enterprise and small startup?
There's definitely differences, without question. I think as, Newmarket was acquired by Amadeus and the company grew, I think you start to feel the changes as well in the culture. But I would say like the biggest differences are, for me, I mean, it definitely aligns with today, right? Day of Impact is the impact you can have in a startup is, to me, light years different. Again, like this is obviously a personal thing for sure, but I've noticed that, and the ability to have that impact as a leader in a smaller organization is much, much different in a very positive way.
And have you observed during your career any challenges that remain the same, or things that have changed in the process?
I would love to tell you that there are no challenges anymore as a woman in leadership or in tech. They're all gone. It's amazing, but I would be lying.
Yeah.
So, I mean, certainly there are still similar challenges, I think, and a lot of them, we had conversations actually today at lunch. We were talking through some things from the past and the present. As much as we want things to be different, there are some things that are still the same. I think Randy said it best, that it's a systemic thing, right? And so sometimes I don't even hold other people like not accountable. I guess I actually don't hold them accountable, but in fairness, responsible, because I don't necessarily think that some people are saying things to be, egregious or inappropriate, or it's a systemic thing, right? I think we all have a lot to learn. So still challenges, unfortunately, but true. But yeah, I think difference. I have noticed a tremendous difference. Obviously, I've been in tech for 25 years. It's definitely changed. And I think I've also evolved where I don't really take it as much as I used to. So I think before I would have been much more passive, or maybe even passive aggressive, which arguably is worse. And now I'm
pretty much outright about it, just plain aggressive. Like if you see something, say something, right? Like I think we all have a responsibility.
Well, hopefully after today, we'll all meet new colleagues that will help along the way. Looking backwards in all of those years, have you faced any particular complex situation where you feel that it happened because of your gender? Can you share with us something very personal, very complex, and of course, how you overcame that situation?
No. Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's one story that I've told a few times when I've been on panels or given speeches, and you know, it's easy to tell because it's so like easy to like see, right? So I had a story when I was presenting to a room full of men, somewhat probably mid-career for me, and it was a pretty complex topic. I was talking about a plan for re-architecting a platform over the course of about 18 months. So I was presenting not only the technology, but also the resources and the time frame that we were going to need in order to accomplish this project. It was partly to get sponsorship from the executive team, also get buy-in from the technical side of the house. And in the midst of my presentation, one of the gentlemen in the room said to another gentleman in the room, "What color do you think her nail polish is?" Thank you for doing that, right? That's total crap. Yeah, I love that. Amen. Amen. So true story. I would love to tell you that I stood up in that moment and went, "Are you kidding me?" But I didn't. So what I learned from that was I had spent a lot of my career, and actually that affected me for a long time, trying to fit in, right? To be one of the guys, to, kind of almost blend in and not stand out. I really made it part of my professional career to not stand out. That really taught me that I had to fit in so that no one would ever ask me about my nail polish again, and that wouldn't end up being a thing. So that's really sad, right? But I'll tell you now, oh God, I'll have like sparkles, I'll paint animals on my nails. I don't care, right? So, but I think that took a long time. That took a really long time. And so that definitely affected me in a negative way. And it's one of those stories like you all went, when you heard me, because you can visualize that happening. You can imagine it happening to you. I'm sure some people probably have had similar types of comments made to them, right? And I think what I learned from it was we can't fit in. We have to stand out because we are unique and we bring value to the conversation. And what I was presenting that day was pretty awesome, actually, and my inner critic didn't think so. And that really spoke to me when he said that. It sort of was like, put me in my place, so to speak.
Well, unfortunately, I can relate. During COVID, I remember someone told me or told Zoom meeting something like, "Oh, I got the solution to our problems. We just have to send Mercedes have dinner with more men." So I feel you. I definitely do. But I do want to finish with one more positive or at least futuristic question, because we all learn from the things that we've experienced in the past. Imagine that a baby girl is born today and she tells you that she wants to get into travel and hospitality. If we are painting the future, what would you look or what would you like the future to be for that baby girl 24 years from now? If we were to think about the leadership, what would you like?
Yeah, I mean, two things immediately bounce to mind. One, for sure, I credit a lot of the success I had for the hard work I had to put in, but also that I had good sponsorship. So I did have men in my career that put me in the room. So my wish for the baby girl born today, 25 years from now, is that there are men, because let's face it, they take a lot of the leadership positions, so we do need their support, that they put her in the room, because being in the room provides the opportunity, right? We have to do the hard work, but sometimes we're not even invited in the room. So that's one. And then another is that she doesn't have to fight so hard to prove herself every day, because she should be valued for the intelligence and the skills that she brings to the table and not have to fight. Like, that's what I really wish.
Well, thank you, Melissa. Any questions for Melissa? We do have a couple, so I'm going to walk the room. And while I am walking the room, I'm going to empower, or at least tell the ones at the back, there are a lot of chairs at the front, so please come join us. Don't be shy. Was it here?
Hi, thank you so much
Hi.
for your story. What would you have said now
to the person? I'm really curious. Do you know that every time I tell that story, someone asks me that question? What I say I would have said was I would have told them the exact color of the nail polish and asked if they would like to know where I bought it.
Perfect.
Hi. Okay, so my question is, so one of the things I think you touched on was like a lack of exposure like to women when it comes to like certain like underrepresented like fields. So like tech, like typically like you don't get exposed to that until you're like either in college or later in your career. And so I'm wondering for women that like maybe might have an interest in an industry or an interest in a field that they might not have been exposed to until later in life, like how would you like encourage them, or what advice would you give if they kind of feel like it's too late to make a switch or they've already kind of missed the boat?
Oh, that's a great question. So it's never too late. I'll say, first of all, I think the transitions that can happen in careers at any point in life are amazing. Actually, I've seen some people transition into tech really late in their career. Actually, Mercedes, I think you were a transition into tech. Yes. Indeed. So very possible. You have a role model right there. And I would say like build a network around your people that have done that or in that field, because you're going to learn a lot from other people. You'll be surprised how willing people are to be a mentor. I don't recommend going up to someone and said, "Hi, this is my name and I would love you to be my mentor." That's like asking someone to marry you on the first date. It's a little bit overwhelming. So don't do that. But like build a network around you of people that are doing those things that you're interested in, because you'll be surprised how many women like me. I mean, I love mentoring other women. I think it's definitely a passion of mine. They would be so willing to share information with you and like help you lift you up and provide opportunities. And then similarly with men in that space, can remember like putting you in the room and providing you access is a really important step. And I think that sometimes, unfortunately, there's not enough women in leadership roles to be able to provide that avenue for you. So I always tell people like, don't forget the men. We need them too. Does that
Any
help
other
answer your
questions?
question?
No? Well, thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, so another exciting part. We are now going to start with our panelists. So please, Dorothy, Tracy, and Lisa, come join me on the stage. And again, let's all excuse Ankur because he was trying to make it. Actually, he texted Sylvia and I yesterday from New York, I think, saying, "Hey, ladies, are you also trying to make it to Toronto? Because my flight has been delayed." So he's been trying, I guarantee you, because we've been texting nonstop. So hopefully we'll have him at another time, because both his company, Highgate, and himself, he's been an excellent advocate for Women Shall Thrive. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to steal that mic. So we have one mic for each of the panelists today. Okay, so thank you all. And like I said before, when I was introducing our first speaker, I'd like each of you, if you don't mind, to share your name, your position, and why are you supporting Women in Shall Thrive? Lisa, let's start with you. Oh, you have to turn it up.
Hello again. So my name is Lisa Jordan. I am the Senior Director of Digital Marketing at Red Roof. And first of all, Mercedes, thank you so much for including me in this. I'm really excited to be here. And so what has brought me here, I'm going to tell a very quick story. So when I was in fourth grade, back in the early 80s, the Equal Rights Amendment was up for consideration in the United States. And I was so very passionate about this that I earned the nickname in fourth grade of Miss ERA, because I was like, equal rights for women, why couldn't we have that? And sadly, we still don't have that in the United States, but it's remained a passion of mine. So I'm really here to share that and what little experience and wisdom I can share.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Tracy Mercer. I'm the Senior Vice President for the hotel business for Priceline and also oversee the Priceline Agoda Global Partner Services Group. Why am I here today? Because this topic matters. It's incredibly important to me and something I'm passionate about. I think we've all experienced years of gender bias, discriminatory norms, exclusionary policies, and the most that we can do is talk about it, figure out a way to address it and a way to start bringing it forward, understanding how it impacts us and see how we can start changing it.
Hi, everyone. I am Dorothy Dowling, and I am a managing director at Horwath HTL, which is a large consulting practice in the hospitality industry. And the reason why I'm here today is that when a woman that I care about asks me to be here, I always say yes. So Rachel, I'm here because of Rachel, and I'm here because of Mercedes.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for making the effort. I really appreciate it. And today, obviously, we are going to talk and we will continue talking about the main challenges that we face, in particularly in hospitality and travel. What is it that we can do to change things and hopefully how we can build a community to support one another. So my first question is going to be about gender pay gap, because I think that is relevant that we all care about. According to the US Census Bureau, women working full-time are paid 83 cents per $1 than a man earns. So how can we benchmark or have a benchmark in our industry to know when we are being paid less? What resources we may have to fight that, and perhaps what steps can be taken? I don't know if Lisa, you are first, but I'm going to be asking all the time. So that is, yeah, Jennifer. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for saying, because yes, it is a general figure, but it is true that for certain minorities, that amount is even less. So thank you for saying that.
So I think that a lot of it starts with pay transparency and pay range transparency. And that's something, a lot of my comments are going to be about the United States. So I just want to preface that, but that is something that I think some companies are starting to adopt. Some are still resistant to. It's more common that you would know as a job applicant or as someone who's already an employee if you're working for a government institution what that pay range is. But I think transparency is a big piece of that, because until we know really what the range is, it's really hard to set a benchmark. So I'd say start there.
I can add a little, I mean, it's certainly real in hospitality. I'd love to say we're the only industry that experiences this, but unfortunately I've sort of bridged the technology travel ecosystem for a while, and it's true in technology. It's true in legal services. It's true in financial services. So we're not alone, but it's a reality that you see across sectors and across areas. I think a few things about it. First, it's getting worse. I'd love to say it's getting better, but it's not. Actually, COVID had a negative impact on this and stepped us back even further. There are steps, and totally agree, transparency is one of the steps that we need to be taking. If you're in the US, you can look at the Department of Labor site. There's some great insight on what are the federal rules and then what are the state rules. And you'll be surprised that they're not all 50 states eliminate discrimination on the basis of sex. So there are places you may not want to move. Just put it out there. Also, not all states believe in wage transparency and equality, and that is very inconsistent across the US. Now, that may surprise some people. You may not know that, but that's actually published. You can go to the Department of Labor and look it up by state, look up what the actual laws are. So I think education is a huge piece of it. I think changing that regulation across the US. In the UK, the gender parity gap reporting requires that companies over 250 people report the pay for their companies, and that is shared publicly. I think that is a step in the right direction. All that does right now is says you have to report that there's a gap. It doesn't say you have to fix it necessarily. But again, I believe data is the great neutralizer. You can't argue with me when it's just black and white numbers. That's just a fact. That's not a feeling or an opinion. And so we can start there. We can continue to advocate towards transparency and move it forward.
Dorothy, I'm going to ask you this next question because obviously you have a stellar career and you've been one of the early adopters on being a woman at the top in our industry at the C-level suite. And of course, we are facing a major diversity problem in our industry. Obviously, we all know obviously this room may not or may be representative of our industry. We are an industry where we have twice as many women across the board, right? But yet at the C-level, that's not the case. So I'd like to ask you, Dorothy, what initiatives or policies have you seen that work or that you would love seeing being implemented in hospitality and travel to help break that?
Yeah, so if I may, Mercedes, first of all, I want to thank you and compliment you for asking the question, because there's an awful lot of people that would rather avoid answering that question or even asking that question today. They talk about the progress we have made, which is true. There has been continued improvement in terms of representation. But what I do want to say is that, and it's what I would have responded to the first question, I think the guidelines that the SEC has put in place now with reporting is going to start to have impact. It really is based on many decades ago when affirmative action was really a recommendation. I think if that really had played out, that the situations would have advanced differently and more quickly. But the reality is that the Glass Lewis and ISS ratings impact stock price. And every company is scored now on their ESG, and D&I ratings are part of that. So there are clear requirements now for the large companies that are publicly traded. And the reality, because they need to do, they amplify their results with the partners that they do business with. So I fundamentally believe that that affirmative action is going to start to change some of the numbers. But I would say personally for me, I have been very disheartened post-COVID because a lot of my colleagues have been part of the Great Resignation. Women that have just said, I've had enough and I'm going to pursue my life differently. So I think the kinds of things that Randy talked about, there are systemic changes that have to be addressed. Part of it is allowing women to succeed on their own terms and not have to be like a man to succeed. And that means that we have to define expectations differently. So is that an easy road? No, but I think it begins with the boards now are going to try to get 2 to 3 women on. And I think once that starts to happen, public companies, it is a cascading effect. When women get into senior roles, they hire other senior women. So it is going to take time, but the reality is I think some of the governance is actually going to shape that direction. What I would also respond to the first question, the second question that you've asked me is I also think we've got to help women be better at negotiating and advancing their own careers, and that becomes with intentionality. And I tell every woman that I work with, if they have a dream, then they better put a plan to get it, because the best predictor of success are those that plan for their future. So you have to put that plan in place and you have to commit to executing that plan. And a number of the things that Randy and other people talked about in terms of finding others to support you in executing that plan, but it will not happen overnight. And if I could share one story, because I was here, I'm a Canadian by birth. I was here at a women's event which is in October most years. And I wish I could remember the woman's name. I know her first name is Marnie, but she was number 2 to Roger Federer on the NFL. And I remember her story. It will stay with me forever because she sat on stage when she was negotiating her salary and she said 2 things. I don't want the Canadian tax and I don't want the female tax. I'm getting paid what the guy before me got paid. But she was able to negotiate in that way. And she was powerful in getting that. So we've got to help women do it. And that means they've got to have people around them to support them.
Tracy, thank you. No, thank you so much. Tracy, same as Melissa, obviously you've built a successful career in technology, and that's mainly a male-dominated field. Any particular learnings, best practices, or actions that you've seen working or that you would love to see being implemented?
I wish I could say, oh, this is, guys, this is how we do it. Like, this is the magic pill. There isn't. I mean, there are steps to be taken. There are things that we can do. I am 2 months into joining the Booking Holdings Inc. Family. I'm with the Priceline brand. And some of the things that I've seen across Booking Holdings are really impressive to me. The inclusion training that they do and require every leader to do, calling all senior leaders together to do this diversity, inclusion, and behavioral training, talking about microaggressions, unconscious bias, et cetera. And of course, the skeptic that I am said, well, really, is it working? Let's look at your interview slates. At Priceline, 98% of our interview slates include both a diverse slate of candidates and a diverse slate of interviewees. And everything went through some biased software to sort of neutralize the job descriptions and postings, which was really impressive. And more than half of the candidates that we're hiring are from underrepresented class. So they are putting action in place. What I love is they could talk about that right out of the gate. Part of the reason that drew me there was my interviews were 50% women. The board was filled with women. Some of the CEOs are women. The bench strength is women. And I just missed seeing that. And I really learned at this point in my career things that are important to me and companies that I wanted to gravitate towards and companies that I needed to accept the fact that maybe I can't change them, which was pretty hard as an A-type personality, pretty driven woman. Like, I can do it. I will show them the way. And then you get worn down and you're like, maybe I can't actually, maybe this is going to take longer. So those are a few things I see happening at the company that I'm at now. And it's really, really impressive to me, but I don't think it's a silver bullet. And I do think for each of us, don't assume, I love what Melissa said earlier, don't assume that people are always coming from a place of negative. Sometimes it's purely just ignorance. It's like blissful ignorance. And you have to help them realize we can't be ignorant to that anymore. There are things that I've done in my career when I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I did that. But when you know better, you do better. And that's all we can expect of anyone. And that's all we should expect of those around us. And you're going to encounter different companies, different leaders, different cultures that are going to challenge you probably personally and professionally, but understand the space that it's coming from, the good that you can do and the light that you can bring to them. And that's what I hope to try to do.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the audience, who's coming from a big company or a large enterprise? Raise your hand. Okay, so then who's here representing themselves or a startup or any small company? Nice. I love to see that. Okay, so then let me get into my next question, because according to a research by Harvard, the percentage of women in venture capital firms has remained around 10% for the past 25 years. It hasn't changed. And one of the reasons it may be because only 2% of funding is allocated to female founders, 2%. For those who are considering an opportunity in their career, which requires a big leap of faith or courage, regardless if it is within an enterprise or about funding a new company, what tips would you give them? Any of you? Dorothy, I know that you recently have started your own.
Well, yes. Okay. So getting funding is tough, period. I mean, there's a cycle of it. I don't know how informed everyone is in terms of angel, seed, venture, and private equity, that cycle that one goes through. But to me, there are many issues that impact funding. And I will tell you, in the world that I'm supporting today, it is getting your story and your pitch and your business case established. So yes, there are inequities in terms of the funding mechanisms. Everyone now, I will tell you, and I'll go back to ISS and Glass Lewis, you can all look at your own individual companies if you are a publicly traded company and see how you're being rated. The bottom line is those ratings impact stock price. And so companies are making very intentional decisions about their investment strategies to have a good story when they have to report out. But the bottom line is if women and men want to break through on that cycle of getting funding, it is about understanding the process. And I will tell you, most women that I meet do not understand it. They do not know it. They don't know about financial literacy to the extent that they should. I always tell people, because I grew up in the hotel business, if I had understood years ago the kind of cash that a middle market or an upper middle market hotel throws off, I never would have went into corporate life. Because it is a ticket to being a millionaire before you're 30, if you understand it. But most women have to own that. You have to invest in that. You have to understand that cycle. And then you have to be good at telling your story. And so I don't think it's something that's unique to women. There is certainly more hurdles for women to get there, but I do think it's a two-way street that women also have to invest in that piece of their career growth. So it's owning our responsibility, which I think Randy was talking about earlier.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Lisa, this next one is tough, but I'm going to ask you first, if you allow me. Many of us have suffered from microaggressions, and we were talking about them with Melissa. Could you share an experience that you suffer and how did you address it effectively? And furthermore, if you could think of what steps we could take collectively to learn about things that we can implement to help change those microaggressions, if that is not too much of me asking.
This is good because I was the one that suggested this question. So I'm glad we're talking about this. And I think it's important, first of all, to talk about these things because they're so very common. And I think it's also important for us to acknowledge that it is not only women that face these kinds of microaggressive acts, that it's people of color, it's people with different abilities, it's people from different backgrounds. So while we're in this venue, we're really speaking about women, a lot of this carries over to people with different experiences. But I wanted to give just a couple of examples so people can relate to what microaggressions can look like in the workplace. And then I'm going to share a potential solution or a starting point. So just a few years ago, I was an executive leader on a very small travel organization, but I reported directly to the president. And I would have weekly meetings with the president in his office. And almost every time he would lean back in his chair across the table, put his legs up on the table. I was like, okay, well, he's tall, he's stretching, this is his space. But I also felt a little uncomfortable because there was no way that I would ever feel like, oh, I'm just going to put my legs up on this table too. Let's relax. Let's dig into this. We're talking about performance metric, right? I'm just going to do that right now on my heels. And I really don't think that he ever intended this to be a show of dominance or to make me uncomfortable, but it was. And that's just one example. It wasn't necessarily intended to be threatening. He probably didn't think of it, but I did, right? Another example where I am an obsessive note taker. It's probably a problem, but I just take notes. It's part of what I do. And I was attending a board meeting, again, as a senior leader that was also presenting to our board. And one of our chief of staff said, well, Lisa, would you mind just taking notes? And I said, how about the secretary of the board, whose job it is to take notes? That is their role. And again, I don't believe there's necessarily malintent, but there is just this pervasive expectation of what women can do versus what men can do, especially in a power dynamic. And this isn't a situation, again, where I was part of what I thought was the power dynamic, but it's a little imbalanced. So those are just a couple of examples I could go on. And I know that we've all encountered things. Those are actually pretty minor compared to some of the other experiences I won't share today. But I will share a potential starting point for how do you counter those? How do you turn that situation around? So I learned a new phrase called intentional micro inclusions. So it's the opposite of a microaggression, but the importance there is it is an intentional act or an intentional thought. So an example might be we're in a meeting and Maybe a woman at the table suggests something and it gets passed over. Another woman in that same meeting could say, you know, I was really interested in hearing more about what Dorothy just suggested. Dorothy, could you give us a little bit more insight into that? So circling back to someone, if you feel or you observe that their idea or their voice has been diminished, or, you know, bringing up something that you heard in another meeting. You know, one of my direct reports had this fantastic idea and I wanted to share it with you. And then I'd love to invite her to present that to the team. So you're intentionally including people in decisions and having a voice and making sure that they're heard and making sure that they are able to use the power that they should have.
Any other
So
examples?
I'm going to add a few things. So you hurt my heart today, Mercedes, when you made the comment about send Mercedes out to meet with more men so we can get more business. Because that was the world I started in when all the good looking women were put into situations because that was one of the thoughts that they would bring more business. So it hurts my heart in 2023 that I'm hearing that is still something. But with regards to microaggressions, there's all kinds of it, and I know we're all familiar with what it happens, but I do think that if you have a trusted ally, boss, or someone in your organization that you can bring in and share with them what you're experiencing so that hopefully they can also do exactly what Lisa's saying in an environment or take proactive stances, because quite often if you can do that behind the scenes, others can support you in the situations where you need it. But my heart is still hurting, Mercedes.
Yeah, I agree that especially these days, like you just don't think about those things happening anymore, and they do. One thing I'd say on microaggressions is I don't think everyone understands them, what they are, how they manifest, how they can come up. So if this, while you can deal with it, and I love the terminology, I've not heard that before. While you can deal with it, there is something around providing education. What are microaggressions? How might they show up? And if you have a company or you are in a position of influence to actually educate on what that could look like, how that could be interpreted, what that might mean, and that it won't be tolerated. Because most people, I really believe there's just a lot of ignorance. And I think many people have grown up in a world in which this is just how it is. This is just how it was. This is just, I remember having to do, this hurts my heart, but having to do org charts with pictures on them so someone could see how appealing the sales team was to go make sales calls. And people nod because you know what? Many of you probably lived through that. Like that's a very real thing. It's not gone today. It still exists today. That's okay. We just now need to address it and understand that might not be the right way. That could be perceived as a microaggression. Here's how we might want to be doing that differently. And starting to educate how that could manifest. I really do think, I hope, maybe ignorantly, maybe I'm naively optimistic that, I don't know, you're just an asshole because you don't know. Let them prove to you that, no, they're really an asshole, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt.
I'd like to talk a little bit about family responsibilities. I'm sure that you recognize the name. Sheryl Sandberg, founder of Lean In, stated that women face harder choices between professional success and personal fulfillment. Sometimes being child-free is hardly judged in our society, especially for women. Have you felt or have you seen someone from your team suffer because of their decision, regardless of which decision it is?
I'll take this one with maybe a slightly different perspective. So I don't have children. I do think it is very true. If you look at some of the most senior women, many of us don't have children. That there's different studies that have been done of the 100 women that achieved sort of VP and above, only a third of them had children versus the men in that same sample set, 2/3 of them had children. So there is real statistics about that. When I first started becoming very vocal around women's rights, advocacy, women in leadership and mentorship, the conversation rotated around a lot. but we have kids and we have this extra burden and we should do this. And I did not participate in that. I didn't view it that way, meaning I'm a woman, even if I don't have kids, that's okay. And I may have to take care of an elderly parent. I have a husband who's disabled that I need to help take care of. We all have different obligations. And so my push as women was, don't make this about whether you have kids or you don't have kids. That's not the thing. It is, you are a person, you are an individual, you have commitments outside of work, whatever those may be, and it is okay to balance that. And so it's a different perspective. I've experienced it differently in that people have said, well, I mean, you're a woman, but it's not the same because you don't have kids. No, I'm still here. I'm still a woman, still a thing. And so I think we just need to be cognizant of that.
So there's two things I would offer is, I'm much older than probably most in the room here, but when I chose to have a child, I was in Canada at the time. You had 15 weeks of maternity leave at that time. I only took 5 because I lived in fear that I would quickly, 1, become redundant, and 2, that I would get passed over for opportunities. So that inner voice was, I think, real, but I also think that there were good reasons for me to believe that to be the case. So I fundamentally believe there is pressure when women take time away from work, period, regardless, like as Tracy said. And I do think that that is a systemic issue that we have to address. I think that world has shifted considerably since I had my son. And I fundamentally believe that this next generation of both men and women are approaching parenting very differently and also accepting responsibility, even though a lot of the data still says women carry more of a load. I would also offer, and I know Mercedes has said this to me many times, but I was able to succeed because my husband took a back seat. And I know Tracy's in a similar situation to me, but my husband became a stay-at-home parent when my son was an infant. And that was a choice because we emigrated to the US and it was very difficult for him to get work status at the time. But the Harvard Business Review study that was done not too long ago says that most women that achieve VP status and above have a very supportive spouse. And many of them have a spouse that has taken the back seat instead of the driver's seat. So I always say to people, choose your spouse wisely. They will define your life, not just your career. And I am very grateful because I never would have succeeded the way I did. So I know you've heard me say that story many times, Mercedes, but we do need wind beneath our wings, and we do need partners that support us when we need that voice in our ear to quiet that inner critic.
Wonderful. I'd like to finish with 2 more questions, and I'd like them to be more about takeaways, some things for us to bring home with us. When we were with Randy talking about that imposter syndrome, there is a recent speech that suggested that it's not your job or my job or our job to fix ourselves, but it is our job to fix the system. What can we all do to fix the system? Is there any tangible action that we can perhaps leave today with as homework for us to do better? I'd like each of you to answer that.
Shall I start?
Go ahead, Lisa.
So I think that you do start with yourself, and you start with your circle of influence, and that might be in your family, that may be in your community, in your workplace, ideally all of those things. But I think that I want to come back again to something that I just feel is so very important, which we have to have pay transparency. We have to be able to fix the pay differential because money is power. It's power. That's where, thank you. That's where a lot of this comes from, especially again in the United States, very capitalist focused. We have to have enough money and transparency and understanding of how the financial system works. How do you get funding? How do you get investments? It's really critically important. So I think part of it just comes back to fixing the pay disparity. And I think that continuing to advocate as a citizen or someone with power in business for policies at a federal, at a state, at a local level that will help just reverse or address some of the built-in systemic challenges that continue making it difficult to move past some of these things. So you've got to work at legislation. And I'm really glad that you brought up the act, that the Glass-Lewis Act, because that is such an important step. But it has to be baked into the system to fix the system.
Tracy?
I kind of forgot the question. But I will say tips that I would give someone maybe and things that you could do as you walk away. I think that was kind of the question.
Yeah,
Okay.
basically what I would like is to see if there is anything that we could all perhaps take with us individually, or any homework for us as a Women in Travel Thrive to try to push and fight for.
All right. So I'll give a few kind of tangible tips for each of us as individuals when we walk away, whether you're a man, you're a woman, you're an aunt, uncle, father, daughter, it doesn't really matter. Number one, each of us needs to find our voice and not be afraid. If you are not exercising your voice, be that through advocacy, involvement, voting, whatever it is, that is something you need to do. So that would be my tip number one is find your voice, be involved. Events like this, attending events like this, being involved in Thrive, being involved in Win It, which from GBTA, being involved in a variety, any organization, but find a way to get involved, to network and connect, because you need to see other people who look like you, who act like you, who struggle with the things that you struggle with, and see them persevere through it. Otherwise, it just becomes too difficult. The second is get informed, never stop learning. And I'll echo what Dorothy said, and others have said throughout the day today, which is we need to be accountable for there is numbers behind all of this. There's financial education behind all of this. There is legislation behind all of this. Be informed and be educated on what that means. And then third, and I'll stop there, even though I could keep going. I would say for each of us in the room to be a little bit selfish. And that may be silly sounding, but nothing happens without some self-advocacy. To Dorothy's point, we have support networks. Now that may be a spouse or a partner. That may look totally different for you. That may be a housekeeper. That may be a nanny. That may be something else that you need. But be selfish, not in a bad way. Selfish in that you focus on yourself and what you need to be successful. And no one is going to say, no, don't get this project done early. No, take on less work. You don't need more accounts. You have to be the one that advocates for yourself, draws some of those boundaries, say what you need, whether that's at home in terms of housekeeping or gardening or whatever it is, or whether it's in the workplace saying, I need to be involved in an association and I need the support in doing that. So find your voice, really be involved, be informed, continue to educate yourself, and be a little selfish.
Okay, I agree with everything that people have said. There's two other things that I would add. One is I feel somewhat uncomfortable if people become too strong in exerting their voice. I think one always has to be extraordinarily thoughtful in terms of advocating for yourself. I always talk about don't give people a reason. And part of that is protecting your own brand and understanding how to advocate for yourself in a positive way. And that was why I said sometimes backdooring in terms of things that you might need may get you a better outcome, but it is being very thoughtful about your approach. I do think that a lot of the issues are systemic, and part of my journey in this third act is a lot of the women that I talked about that are choosing, that have chosen a different path in their lives. We hope to put a women's collaboratory group together to become a stronger advocacy group, because the bottom line is sometimes you have to have people outside that can actually be the truth tellers to people in the organization that need to hear it, because you have to be very thoughtful about your political capital and not putting too much on the line so that you can advance your own career. So I just think everyone has to be extremely thoughtful about your approach in these kinds of things, because you can face unintended consequences, like Randy said. And so I always advocate for people to think it through, pressure test it with others, make sure it works in the culture that you're working within, and make sure it's going to drive the right outcome for you and your organization.
Thank you. I think that is kind of related to this last question, but just one more. If you could give your younger self one advice, what would it be?
Go ahead, Tracy.
By booking holdings.
Yeah, you joined that party way too late.
Yeah.
I'm legit differently.
Google booking. Yeah. But I mean, invest.
Okay. So what I would have said is I wish when I was a young woman, I was a very strong feminist. When I got to be a middle-aged woman, I became fearful about my feminist agenda. As a woman now in her third act, I am owning my feminism in a different way. I wish that I hadn't lost sight of that, but the pressure of trying to achieve a career in a male-dominated world forced me to put my feminist agenda aside and approach it in a different way. Would I do it differently? I don't know, Mercedes, because I think one has to assess the game that you're playing and seeing how it goes. But I think there are things I could have done different or better that may have got me there differently or faster.
So I was going to go with invest, make sure that you're maxing out your 401k as soon as you possibly can. So thank you for having one of mine. So I get another one. What I would say is I think it's just so important over the course of your career to stay in touch and build a long-term network of allies, supporters, stay in touch with the managers or the colleagues that you really liked working with. Or, stay in touch with your direct reports. It doesn't have to be regular, but just keep those connections alive, because the people that you meet throughout your career, the people you work with on a project or at work or on a committee, those people, you're going to work with them, you're going to encounter them again. And having a good support network outside of your day-to-day job or your day-to-day field is really so valuable when things change. And things will change. They will change without you expecting it. And this network that you've built up over time is going to be such a support for you when things come up.
Well, I could not be more thankful to Thrive, because that's how we all met. So I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to have met a strong and wonderful woman like the three of you and the ones before me here on the stage. So thank you so much. I'm going to save some questions because we're going to have a networker, and you are more than welcome to ask questions later. So again, thank you all for coming. And I think that I like just to keep going with the closing. So Sylvia, you want to join me on stage for the closing?
I think we have a slide.
We are clicking on the green one. I guarantee you that.
It is the green button. Okay. I'm not sure why this slide is not moving forward. Oh, there we go. Well, we sort of teased this a little bit, but I just wanted to share again that we're really excited about our collaboration with HSMAI Foundation. I want to maybe give a huge kudos to Noreen Henry, who's been championing it on that side, on the board of HSMAI Foundation. And one of the things we decided to partner up on is a study on the power mentorship. So perfect ending to some of the conversation we just had. And Lisa, you said it correctly, mentorship and connections really matter. We would like you to take a minute. It's not really a minute survey, but I would say about 10-ish. So you can also scan it later or just save it for later. We're going to send out an email to all of our database. So if you're following us, you'll get this, so you can also do it later. But the idea is that you would give us your input, and we will digest that along with some other qualitative research that we've already done. And we'll be publishing this later in fall in conjunction with HSMAI Foundation. So super excited to do that. And hope for we find another ways to continue to have this conversation. Last but not least, oh, this is just like workout here with this, but there we go. Well, I know you're all eager to just talk and network and have this conversation. Just one more side note, we're very excited to have some books out here from our speakers. So please, be generous, potentially donate to us and maybe grab a book if you like. Really cool QR code done by our friends at ETIP. So they are actually one of our sponsors as well. And it's a really cool platform. So just plug on there for them. And, we're just very excited to be here. I'm so grateful to you, Mercedes. You're amazing. And thanks for everyone that just came in and joined us for our inaugural day in person. And those of you online, glad that you're here, glad that you're listening, and join us once again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Join us and thank you again. And let's go and have fun together.
If you're one of our panelists, if you can come up, we want to take a couple pictures.
Melissa, I'm going to ask you to come to the stage. Randy, Dorothy, Tracy,